Hey guys, what's going on? So last week I had a pretty good week and just went out and did some photography and stuff. Got a couple pictures of salmon jumping, which was pretty cool. Hope you had a really good week. But today I want to talk about basically my guesses. These are guesses and speculation on what I think the Switch 2 will be, when it'll be announced. And I want to do this before the Nintendo Direct tomorrow. And I don't think it's going to be at the Nintendo Direct tomorrow, but just in case it's out there. Now, just like the last time I did a video on this, which was about the Switch Pro, which, I don't know, I'll maybe put a link to it somewhere. You guys can go back and watch that. I had predicted like months before the Switch Pro ever came out or the OLED Switch. It was literally just a Switch with a better screen in it. And I was able to do this by basically looking at what was going on currently in the market, both in the technology sector and games sector, and then also look at like some deals that have gone between certain companies like Intelux and Nvidia and Nintendo that were made public, and on top of that, like some old patents, and then finally just kind of like what Nintendo's done in the past. And we may not learn this for years to come, but I don't think the Switch Pro ever existed. I don't think it was ever a real thing. Yes, I heard about developers getting development kits. What I think this was is similar to before the Switch launched and it was still like the NX, I think is what they were codenaming it. That had a few prototype development kits that went to close third-party partners of Nintendo, i.e. like Capcom, Namco, those guys. Matter of fact, I think Capcom actually went to Nintendo during that development cycle, and the Switch was originally supposed to have 2 gigabytes of RAM, and they said, look, we can't, or maybe it was 3. It was 2 or 3 gigabytes of RAM. And they told Nintendo, like, we can't even put Resident Evil on this thing unless you guys give us at least 4. I do believe Nintendo started opening up and doing this with really tight NDAs with these companies, so it's not easy for them to leak it out. But every once in a while, I just think like a little nugget of information gets slipped under to somebody, or maybe something said at like a conference or something that shouldn't have been said that kind of leads to something. And I think the Switch Pro development kits were always early Nintendo Switch 2 or whatever they decide to call the next Nintendo system. And hopefully what we find out years later is that the OLED Switch was always supposed to be the OLED Switch. It just never made sense to bring out a Pro model in the middle of a pandemic when there's a chip shortage. That's not what Nintendo's MO is. They're not cutting edge anymore. They haven't been for a few years. And as a matter of fact, Nintendo has a history of developing things. If you guys have ever seen this Project Atlas, which was like sort of like an early prototype Game Boy Advance, they had prototyped that out in 1996. But the Game Boy Advance, the color came out 2 years later, and the Game Boy Advance didn't come out in 2001. Why? Because with the portable line of systems, Nintendo always wanted those to be super affordable because they saw it as the second purchase to your main console at home. And so they never wanted you to like spend any more than like $100 on those systems. And so they might have developed that in 96, but they might have waited for the technology to kind of like, come down in price to the point where, it would be in that affordable range. And Nintendo's shown us that this mentality started with Gunpei Yokoi with the Game Boy. That, they could have put a color screen and stuff in it, but it would ate up the battery life and it would have made it a lot more expensive. So by having the black and white or pea green screen as we first got on that thing, it was 15-hour battery life compared to everybody else that was getting like maybe 6 hours tops. And then on top of that, like it was cheaper. It was a lot cheaper. So Nintendo's always tried to give a little bit of a cutting edge, whether it was the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, N64 and GameCube was really the last generation. There's a lot of reports now that have kind of come out saying that GameCube was actually indeed a little bit more powerful than PS2. But when GameCube didn't sell so well, I think they recognized that something needed to change, and they had these motion controllers that they had prototyped for the GameCube and thought, well, if we bring these out, not everybody's going to be able to use them. Maybe this is something you can learn from Donkey Kong, the bongos or whatnot. They're like, hey, most people don't have these, or I think there was like a microphone peripheral at one point. And we were also in this weird transition where people were going from standard definition TV to HD TV, and to produce a console for an HD TV at the time was just insanely expensive. So whether you liked the Wii or you didn't like the Wii, I think wisely at the time, Nintendo chose to do sort of like a souped up GameCube that could do 480 progressive scan and still kind of be on that technology, and also take their motion controllers that they'd worked on and put it in the box along with that, so everybody had that and they could take advantage of that. Because I think by doing that, they kind of took the sting off of it not really being an HD system a little bit. And by doing that, they were also to move that lower price, easier entry, cost entry for families and stuff from their portable line over to their console line for the first time. And it worked. As far as hardware goes, the Nintendo Wii sold way more than any other console that generation. Also, a benefit, Nintendo didn't take a loss on a new generation system by basically repackaging the old generation and just making it a little bit more powerful. With the Nintendo Wii, for the first time, they actually made money on the sale of the console. And then we got the Wii U. And you can see where the Wii U was kind of like the beginning idea of the Switch, but they couldn't really quite pull it off yet. They didn't have a mobile processor that was powerful enough, so they were trying to stream it, and then the streaming, like couldn't go that far from the console, and a lot of people just wanted to sit on their can and play Zelda or whatever, but couldn't because the signal couldn't get through the wall. So just really, honestly, good idea, but bad design with the Wii U. So going back to the drawing board, then we got the NX and eventually the Switch. But even the Switch, if you look at the hardware, it's still, at its heart, it's a Tegra X1, which was 2 years old at that time. So NVIDIA and Nintendo might have been co-developing that together. It might have been just NVIDIA. I'd like to think that it was Nintendo had some say in there, but maybe Nintendo just waited 2 years and NVIDIA just used it to sell a product to shield until it came down in manufacturing price enough to where Nintendo could say, okay, now we can release it. But going to this was kind of brave for Nintendo, and I guess they felt like they didn't have a whole lot to lose because they were finally consolidating both their portable and handheld unit into one unit. Helped them out because development teams now weren't split across different devices. They could all work on just one singular device. Probably get more games out, and it does seem like we've gotten a good few amount of good games out. However, some of those have been re-releases from the Wii U and other systems. And I thought this was interesting. I listened to Nate the Hate podcast at work the other day, and they're like, there's never been anybody that's launched a system in March. Nintendo did that with the Switch. The last Switch was launched in a March time frame. And I think what Nintendo learned is you don't need to have like all these heavy hitters right off the bat. You just have to have like basically one good game. Start rolling out the hardware, because part of the problem with manufacturing is if you start at a certain date, like especially the holiday season, it's kind of tough. You get hype built up, but hype doesn't really sell you systems. And especially in a situation where I think, just like with the past 2 systems, or past 3 systems actually, I imagine Nintendo's going to sell this at somewhat of a profit. So if you're selling it at a profit, not a loss, it's more logical to want to sell as many as you can during the holiday season. So it's more logical to start in March, ramp up both your games library throughout the year and your ability to produce and manufacture these systems throughout the year going into the holiday season, which is the most lucrative for everybody. And this lead up time by launching in March is also good because it gives your developers time to kind of polish their games, kind of move them over to the new system, kind of gives them time to understand how to program on a system instead of a big rush. I can't tell you if it's LCD, OLED. I hope they just stick with OLED. I'd be happy if they stuck with the 720p OLED screen personally, if it's at 7 inches. But having said that, sounds like it's going to be DLSS enabled, all these other fun things, and I think that's smart. I think having something being able to render at a much lower resolution and try to reconstruct it through deep learning super sampling is a very smart way of handling this problem. And I've heard while this may output in 4K, it may not technically output in 4K. Like the image will be out there and it'll scale up from a 1080 image. Another thing to keep in mind is while DLSS is great, it does a better job at I would say like a moderate resolution, like a 720, especially like a 1080 and going up to a higher resolution at that point. Where when you get into like 480 resolutions and you're scaling up from that and trying to super sample that off of deep learning, it's not as a crisp looking image. I would equate it to something like looking at more like a 1440 image. It's a little bit softer looking. So I don't think it'll be necessarily as crisp as something like what an Xbox or a PS5 can do. So they apparently showed this off in rooms at Gamescom, and I expect them to do it at Tokyo Game Show as well. And this is them showing it to people that they haven't been working closely with. So I still suspect that companies like Capcom and Namco that they've been close with for years have probably had these dev kits for a while, and this is where the Switch Pro rumors originated from. That was a weird way to say that. Anyways, just like with the Game Boy Advance and the Atlas, They tend to work on things for years. Like, I guarantee you they probably start working on their next generation system as easily up to a year after the Switch launched. So this has probably been an ongoing thing for years. So when do I think that they announce this thing? Do I think they can announce it tomorrow? No. Not really. And this depends on two things. Now, we're hearing some reports out there saying that that they have a new cartridge for this new system. And it's kind of like the 3DS going from the DS, where there's like a little notch or something in there to denote it from like one to the other. But we'll still actually use like the same cartridge slot type, so you can use the older cartridges in here. That tells me that they have some kind of backwards compatibility in place here. So with all this information, what's this tell us about a launch time frame? So here's my thoughts on the launch time frame. First of all, I think them launching and successfully launching in a March timeframe with the Switch and having that time to build up into holiday season and then bring out like a new Mario game along with like other games like Toad Treasure Tracker and stuff to kind of fill in there. And I think like Donkey Kong might have came out that year, but I'm not sure. But they had a few games to build up to, right? And to give them like a better chance at a holiday season, it worked. And this thing's still selling pretty well today. They've played this whole generation pretty smartly. I think if they don't have backwards compatibility, there's no way they announce this before the holiday season. They do not want to cannibalize their current Switch stuff. However, what we've been seeing is them re-releasing holiday-style packages of the Switch already into the stream. And I'd hate to say it, but I think the new next generation system is probably going to be more expensive than the current Switch. So we've never really had a price drop. And I would say I would not even be surprised if the next generation Switch is on the $400 or $500 range, because everything has been going up, and I just think that's like the new price of things now, unfortunately. And I think this is how Nintendo's going to deal with it without increasing prices of their older systems. If there is backwards compatibility with this new device, I think that they announce it before holiday season of this year and launch in March of next year. But based on the rumors out there that I have no verification for whatsoever, I would like to hope that this thing is backwards compatibility in some way. So what would I like in the next generation Switch? I would definitely like no more Joy-Con drift. That would be nice. Slightly better looking screen, obviously, but I think the OLED is already pretty damn good. So maybe just like reiterate on that. Better online, and I mean like don't go play like Super Mario Maker 2 and it like stutters like crazy, or Smash or something like that. I actually like want a really good solid online base this time. I want an actual store built into the OS as opposed to basically being a web browser based thing that can barely run now at this point because there's so many games on the Switch. Speaking of the store, I'd like to see something where I can just like leave like a little bit of rating, whether it's just like 0 to 5 stars, and just say like, hey, to other consumers, hey, this is like a better product or not. I would like voice chat. Voice chat would be very nice. I never really understood why there's not voice chat and why they put it into the phone. I think that was a processing thing. I think they just didn't have enough horsepower on the last device to really implement it. So by putting it on your phone, that was the way. Or maybe it was like they were worried about parents or kids chatting with somebody in private that they, might have been like not on the up and up or something like that. But this new device, if that's a concern, just lock voice chat on and off behind parental controls and let us adults that still play Nintendo games be able to voice chat through the device. I liked some of the improvements with Twitter, Friends, and I think it was like Facebook and other places where if you were friends with somebody on those platforms and you signed in through your Switch, you can not only post like videos and pictures of your games and stuff to those platforms, but you also had the ability to just like friend each other without friend codes. I would like to see the friending of each other be made a little bit more simple. I do like just going to conventions and stuff and having people there that I meet that I want to game with and just be like, hey, here's my device, here's your device, let's be friends. And on top of that, like another thing carry over, it's cool is if somebody has like a newer patch of a game that I need to play ad hoc with them back and forth, keep that. That was awesome. Messages. Please bring messages back. Why is that not on the Switch? I never understood that. And then obviously bring invites over. I get worried every time a new Nintendo device comes out that stuff that I had in the previous one is just gone on the next one. They have a bad habit of doing that. And lastly, this is just for me, but guys, bring back Street Pass. It was awesome. It's a portable device. I take it to conventions and stuff. Bring back Street Pass. It was really neat. Okay, so to sum this whole thing up really quick, no, I never really thought Switch Pro ever actually existed. I think that was all just rumors and BS, which, people were just trying to get clicks on YouTube anyway, so I think a lot of that just happens. I think it was always like development of a Switch 2 or Switch Successor. I think if backwards compatibility is not a problem, or possibly docking your old device to the new dock is not a problem, then I think we get an earlier announcement. If there is no backwards compatibility, I think Nintendo is definitely would be worried about that, and we probably would not hear about it until next year. So that's where we're at. I would say probably in that case we'd get an announcement like around March or maybe a little bit before, next year if there is no backwards compatibility, and then they would launch like into the holiday season with something. And just to be clear, if adding backwards compatibility is such a detriment to the device's overall horsepower and what it can do for like next generation games, meaning that like by having backwards compatibility in there some way like holds back what the system's actually capable of doing, I'd rather not have the backwards compatibility, because I think we're still having problems producing chips and stuff in this world, and I think the idea of like having like a more powerful next generation Switch down the line to fix some kind of weird problem or something with that, I would just rather have it just be as powerful as it is now and just run it for like the next 5-6 years or so. And that's one thing I'll bring up right now, and maybe you guys don't agree with this, and I'm really curious on this, but when it comes to home consoles like the PlayStation, the Xbox, stuff like that, those devices I kind of look at like solid 7-year devices with like a overlap of like 10, meaning like their next generation system kind of comes around that 7-year mark, but there's still like some overlap between them for like a couple years. Where I see the Switch should be more like a 5-year console until the next one comes out, was like maybe an overlap of 7. I don't know how you guys feel about that. Let me know. Let me know what you think about my take on this. I'm really curious to see what's right and what's wrong, or how wrong I am on all this. And yeah, I'm curious to see what's at the Direct tomorrow. I think it's going to be mostly just games that are coming out for this holiday season. So I'm excited to see what they have. Anyways, see you guys in the next video. Later.